moisture like sun lays me down. With my mind she runs throughout the night. No need to fight, never a frown, with golden brown. Every time, just like the last, on her ship, tied to the mast, to distant land.
Howdy, folks. Your host, Double J, back here, coming at you live from my studio / RV dining room, directly outside the city of Little Port-au-Prince, Ohio, the city formerly known as Springfield, Ohio, the place where they're eating the cats, they're eating the dogs. Anyhow, folks of the interwebs, I will be your pilot and navigator for this shenanigan-infused journey into the mind of this particular garbage can dude. And thanks for joining me here for a fun-filled discussion on OJ Simpson did not do it, a Idaho 4 case comparison. I've obviously spent a lot of hours here on Operation GCD and some conversations with the occult rejects and Ron from New England regarding the Idaho 4 case discussion, and I recommend folks of the interwebs definitely check that out. Lots of hours on that. In fact, I see Kane B here in the chat here. I joined Kane B over there on the Purge. Good to see you, Kane. Joined Kane B there. Actually, two of the last 3 weeks there on his show, discussing the Idaho 4 case. Some more of my evolved thoughts on the matter, if you will. So I definitely recommend checking that out too. On its face, I realize, Idaho 4 and OJ Simpson case may not have a lot of comparisons, but they definitely do. Not just the fact that some of the characters from the Idaho case, from the OJ case, such as Mark Fuhrman, one of the detectives, very important figure in the case, and Marcia Clark have routinely been providing commentary on the Idaho 4 case, various news networks and whatnot. So I think that's interesting in and of itself. Those are two very, very interesting characters. Notably, Fuhrman has some long-standing white nationalist connections up into Idaho, northern Idaho. In fact, the immediate vicinity of where a number of the victims and other parties in this case hail from, up there in Coeur d'Alene region, just north of Coeur d'Alene. And Marcia Clark, when Fuhrman retired there years ago following the OJ case. His relations with that area, though, apparently predate that time frame and that 1995 time frame. So certainly some more interesting details to get into there. And with Marcia Clark, a very Scientologist related individual. I don't know that she still claims to be part of Scientology, but both of her husbands, the guy that married her husband, who officiated her marriage to her second husband, who also happened to murder her first husband, all Scientologists. Very strange tale. And if you folks of the interwebs didn't know, OJ Simpson, also a Scientologist. So that's all very, very interesting with those details in context of whatever the hell went on with the OJ situation. But much like I assert Brian Kohberger did not do it, OJ Simpson did not do it. And that's really bore out by the forensic, details or the details of the case and the forensic science, forensic evidence of the case, some of which that science never made it to court. Folks like Kerry Mullis, the guy who invented the PCR test, he famous through the COVID era testing. He volunteered to testify in support of OJ Simpson on his defense team volunteering, and that he never quite made it to court. That was much blocked, in large part. But those same details and his same argument could certainly be applied to the Idaho 4 case, where the state is misusing the PCR tests in which to incriminate these individuals. So another good comparison. So I got a list of comparisons there, but starting with the noticing the Fuhrman Clark thing made me wonder, that's strange because Mark Fuhrman's always kind of gotten a free pass. It seems he's gone on to do a number of things. He allegedly solved murder related to the Kennedy family, that Martha Moxley murder with that Skakel fella. I believe there's been a lot of contention in that case, but he's responsible for solving that cold case in the immediate aftermath of his retirement from the OJ case. So he's been involved in some interesting things in his retirement. But Fuhrman just getting a free pass. Like he's on Idaho, he's doing Idaho 4 commentary. He's a convicted felon, from perjuring himself in the OJ case. He doesn't answer these questions. No one says, "Hey, what's up with all these white nationalist ties?" Or "What's up with you being a felon?" It's just odd that they would ask this guy, like, "Hey, we need someone to come comment on this quadruple homicide out of Moscow. You live in Idaho. You live around a bunch of white nationalists and are friends with them, and apparently, according to numerous law enforcement reports, have close ties to them. Why don't and you're a felon? Why you can't be trusted? You perjured yourself. Why don't you come provide commentary on this case?" It just seems like a strange environment. Just the long and the short of it, 6 degrees of Fuhrman indeed, for sure. So just him not getting any kind of questions like that causes me to wonder, the whole media campaign. Again, it's the similarities between the media campaign to convict OJ and the media campaign to convict Bryan Kohberger are, in my opinion, nearly identical, to the point where I'm sure a lot of folks of the interwebs hear OJ Simpson did not do it. Like that's probably, to some folks, probably a shocking statement because the media campaign really did a great job, in convicting OJ Simpson in the court of, public opinion. So that was I think that was well, I mean, it really has lasted, right? I mean, really, quite honestly, the propaganda continues, right? I mean, Netflix movies starring some Scientologists, the People versus OJ Simpson, I believe it was called. This, this campaign continued throughout into our modern time. We got Kato Kalin doing some rounds right now. Kato Kalin, the guy living in the guest house, who I don't know why anyone really trusts his story because he changed it mid-trial from his grand jury testimony to the point where the prosecution treated him as a hostile witness. But for some reason, Kato Kalin's doing rounds today, telling tales. I believe he's saying OJ did it. And he's an interesting character anyway because he was not really OJ's friend in the first place. He was Nicole Brown Simpson's friend. So very, very odd. I often wonder, is Kato Kalin a Scientologist? Because it seems like an odd connection there with old OJ. Good again, firm. So the comparisons are, they really do continue past just the personalities and characters involved, right? So one of the key aspects of or the media campaigns, right? Those are obviously some very, very similar circumstances for both cases. One of the key pieces of evidence in both crimes never located. So no knife in the OJ Simpson or the murders of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman. No knife located in the Idaho 4 case, right? Not only just that, the way the law enforcement investigations went about, quote unquote, searching for the knife, very strikingly similar circumstances in their searches or their appearance of a search, right? The FBI is very much involved in both cases. The FBI, a little bit more, I would say, likely more involved in the Kohberger situation, as they're the ones generating the key pieces of evidence. They're the ones behind multi-state manhunts. They're the ones, allegedly producing this DNA, or at least the sample in which the IGG investigation could be conducted. A lot of smoke and mirrors with that process, but it seems like the FBI is the ones pulling all the strings. Believe one of the most recent, circumstances surrounding that was Othram didn't develop it. They couldn't, and the FBI developed it. So, yet to be seen exactly how all that plays out, given all the, the smoke and mirrors surrounding that, because the state of Idaho won't even mention the word Othram Labs in a court filing. So that's apparently a word they're not allowed to say. The defense says it, but the prosecutor, it's on their list of restricted words. So, but the FBI plays a very important role in the Simpson case, and it's very similar in kind of not so much the role they play in the Idaho 4 case, but similar in the aspect that the FBI plays a role where certain things are tested, certain pieces of evidence, blood samples, etc., are tested. Shoe prints, obviously there's a big shoe print at the piece of evidence in the OJ case, the OJ's alleged Bruno shoes or whatever, Bruno, some fancy Italian loafers. The Idaho 4 case, the van shoe print that went by the wayside. The van shoe print was allegedly yielded by Moscow PD and in Idaho in their investigation. I'm sorry, the Idaho State Police. However, I wait to be seen. The FBI is probably involved in that too. But yeah, the FBI in the OJ case, their shoe print evidence seemed somewhat suspect as well, amongst other characteristics. So that seems like a pretty pretty questionable environment when you're looking at a lot of their activities surrounding the Idaho 4 case, especially because again, they're the ones who developed the evidence around the Elantra. They're the ones who all the key pieces of evidence are basically generated by the FBI. But that's not where it ends. There's lots more examples in comparison with the Kohberger situation and the OJ Simpson case. So, as I was saying about some things are tested, some things are not tested, evidence wise. We have that in the Kohberger case, right? In the Idaho 4 case, there's DNA samples that they apparently didn't feel the need to do any sort of IgG investigations on or identify the owners of these samples, one of which was at least in the immediate vicinity of the victims. So that seems pretty telling. Very, very similar to the situation in the OJ case. Also, relative to the evidence, there seems to be planting of evidence in both cases, right? That became a major factor in the OJ case for good reason. But it seemed odd in the OJ case where maybe they kind of there was some smoke and mirrors there because there was a lot of other evidence that some stuff the judge wouldn't let in the trial, but some stuff the defense didn't argue. Now, back to the 6 degrees of Mark Fuhrman, it could be because the defense focused so much on Fuhrman and his illicit and nefarious actions that they didn't have to address some of those other gaping holes in the forensics in the case of against OJ. But nonetheless, same situation with Kohberger, multiple DNA samples. I believe I read something here this evening from Brian Inton on News Nation claiming some sort of release of information regarding some sort of three different DNA samples or something like that underneath the fingernails of one of the victims. I don't know if that was unsealed by the court or where that information is coming from, but that would be another great example of a gaping hole in the forensic evidence in their case, especially a case against Kohberger in that instance. So the Kohberger case, I mean, it's obviously been inferred and certainly seems that the knife sheath could have been planted there based upon the lack of the seemingly varying accounts of when the knife sheath was located and precisely its location, as in some officers didn't see it upon first pass and other officers who later saw it identified it in two separate locations. I believe one underneath and one next to. Not clear when the actions that transpired there. It is curious to know the chain of evidence, though, right? So one thing that's not really been publicly released yet and is likely, known to the court and all parties because it's probably under seal is if there is a chain of evidence with the knife sheath, as in, this officer collected it at the scene, of the crime scene, at the murder house, put right on a evidence card or, note whatever their form is for that officer, time, date, location, bag it and tag it. And then the next person that touches it has to go through that same process. And there's not, and then checked into evidence room, et cetera. Nonetheless, still a transfer of the custody of that evidence, and the chain of custody is established through that record. So, I'm curious to see what that chain of custody is on the knife sheath, because the chain of custody became a major issue with numerous pieces of evidence in the OJ case. And, I think one of the other most telling aspects to me that jumped out at me real early in looking at these two cases is the the timelines. So it seems like in both cases, you have authorities establishing a presumed timeline or their version of events, only to then have to change that version of events to comport with evidence that was later produced. Meaning they're not objectively trying to establish what occurred in a timeline. They lock themselves into a timeline, and then evidence is produced later that negates that timeline. This occurs over and over again in the OJ case. Seems to occur here in the Idaho 4 case as well, with instances such as Kathy Mabutt, the coroner / criminal defense attorney and University of Idaho grad. It's like Twin Peaks up there, folks. I mean, I've never been to Moscow, Idaho, but looking at the structure of their government and key folks in town, everybody's a University of Idaho grad, and it seems like University of Idaho owns that town because they seem to largely fund the existence of that town. And one thing that has always interested me is much of the town's real estate is owned by two parties, the university and the Christ Church folks, and they're nonprofits, so they don't pay taxes as these church and university entities. So, I mean, I don't know who pays taxes in that town, but I know who funds the police force, because they have a whole campus division of Moscow PD. They don't have their own campus police; they have campus division. So, not only do they directly fund them through that mechanism, if that university didn't exist, that town would exist. And preceding the murders, they had a lot of financial woes, and I'll have to rehash some of those subjects, but I definitely wrote a Substack article about it at some point in time, the financial environment that existed for the university and the town preceding these murders. Because that really, to me, that became an early factor. Is these kids had to go back to school in order to keep the university and the town in business, and for that matter, the police. So they actually had to deter any sort of ideas of threat, which they did early on in their isolated targeted attack. So that isolated targeted attack, that according to Kathy Mabutt, that occurred at 3 a.m. So that later they had to later change their timeline, alter it in order to fit DoorDash driver deliveries just after 4 a.m. Victim Xana Kernodle being on her social media, I believe, up until nearly 4:15 a.m. So these things obviously altered the chain of events in the timeline. Not to mention the police doing that themselves with shifting roommates and their statements from the first floor to the second floor, etc. So a lot of comparisons there between an established narrative that the state, the folks prosecuting these crimes, would then try to force onto the suspect Simpson, or the suspect now Koberger, in a manner that just, it seems glaringly obvious that something ain't right here. If you're establishing a timeline of a crime and the events, you shouldn't have to stick hard and fast to a narrative, only to be forced to change it later when evidence is presented, which should reasonably should have been considered, in and around the time you establish the narrative. That's what an investigation is called. But what do I know? They clearly know a lot more what's going on in these cases, because they do a great job. They do a real fantastic job. I think both of these cases, I'm being very sarcastic, so I think both of these cases are great examples of the travesty that is the American justice system. And I think part of that is political, right? There's a lot of political weight and other parapolitical activities that seem to be surrounding both of these cases, including drug trafficking. In my estimations, it seems that the fraternities and sororities on University of Idaho and Washington State University have a lengthy, what appears to be organized, lengthy history of drug trafficking, large scale drug trafficking, including a 2019 report from the Quad Regional Drug Task Force. The Regional Drug Task Force. I don't think it's called Quad Cities, but whatever it's called, it's the Regional Drug Task Force. They published a report in 2019 asserting that they'd busted a fraternity over in Washington State campus that was they had a pill stamping operation. Now, pill stamps, those are highly regulated and guarded, so it's not like you can just go down to your local Walgreens, purchase yourself a pill stamper. So I don't know if there's any really investigation into the whereabouts of how they acquired this pill stamper, because I would later look to try to find these court cases. They may have been sealed because I can't find them, but the press release regarding these activities is certainly available on the interwebs. But I don't know. It seems to me, though, that's kind of this power, this political power, parapolitical power that can do these things, such as seal such large-scale drug trafficking cases where a fraternity is stamping Xanaxes and selling them as far as Seattle. It's a lengthy drug channel. It's a 4.5-hour drive, approximately. Not the only example of a drug channel that exists from the two campuses there, as in March of 2023, University of Idaho fraternity president, well, I believe he just resigned according to all reports just previous to his death, and quite honestly, that may be an integral factor in why he became a victim. But that fraternity president, Caden Young, was in Seattle himself, just like the pill stamping operation was shipping their Xanaxes as far away as Seattle. Caden Young was up in Seattle from Moscow, along with two apparent drug dealers that seem to have associations with the murder home and its occupants. Those drug dealers would later have their charges dropped, apparently, for the overdose death of Caden Young. So don't know how that shook out, but certainly seems to be some sort of agreement reached, perhaps. I don't think there's really been anything that's come to fruition from that, exhibiting what occurred there, but they were apprehended and charged and later dropped. So I just think that's interesting that you have numerous examples regarding seemingly drug trafficking. I mean, there wasn't I don't believe there's any reports that they were trafficking in drugs in the Caden Young situation, but he's there gets a hot shot of fentanyl laced cocaine with two drug dealers from Moscow, Idaho. So, I mean, I don't think it's a leap to say that there's some drug trafficking going on there in these examples as far away as Seattle. So these aren't small examples. These aren't just dropping around town. There's obviously something more going on there. And again, a lengthy history of numerous other incidents of this nature. So on both campuses. So it seems to be a narrative surrounding that case. And one thing that was long ignored, I don't think I've ever seen it in the Netflix movies. I didn't watch it, but I don't think they covered in the People versus OJ Simpson the cocaine trafficking surrounding the OJ Simpson case, because it certainly wasn't in any news coverage. That's for damn sure. But not only was OJ surrounded by he was a Scientologist, hanging out with old Process Church Bob Cocaine Evans, who also, is closely associated to other folks in this OJ murder case situation. But OJ is also surrounded by a number of mafia figures, including one that is murdered shortly after Nicole Simpson and Ron Goldman were murdered, I believe about 2 weeks later. One of OJ's closest associates at that point in time for roughly 20 years, a guy that was running mob business up in Buffalo back in 1975, according to the FBI reports. And he was a nightclub owner up there. And one of OJ's closest associates, allegedly, OJ came to see OJ approximately 1 month prior to his murder. So, in the weeks preceding Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman's murder. But nonetheless, OJ's got some interesting friends. The Scientologists, the Process Church folks, like Bob Cocaine Evans, who I at least assert is a major figure in the Process Church situation in Hollywood. Deep connections to a lot of those things. And again, he's connected through numerous aspects of this OJ Simpson situation. But on top of that, the cocaine trafficking seems to revolve these characters, the cult characters, the mafia characters, through various restaurants in Brentwood, California, and neighboring Malibu, including the restaurant in which Ron Goldman worked at, Mezzaluna. That they shut down shortly thereafter. So did the other two restaurants that had cocaine trafficking and mobsters owning those. Now, mobster didn't own the Mezzaluna, but by all appearances, the same thing goes for the same two for Mezzaluna as it does the other Italian restaurants owned by these or these other restaurants owned by the Italian mobster fellows in the area. Seem to be the same network. Now, the FBI would later, shut down these operations, at least the other operations, and a mobster by the name of Joey Ippolito, I believe, of the Lucchese crime family, the DeCalventes out of Jersey and the Lucchese out of New York crime family. He would later get busted. A lot of deaths surrounding that situation too. Not just Ron Goldman. Again, he was a waiter. He wasn't the only waiter friend of his to find himself brutally stabbed and slashed, like Ron Goldman was, about a dozen times. So there was another murder like that preceding and after that. So not only are these cocaine trafficking well established through some federal investigations surrounding the matter, and Bob Evans' friends surround that stuff too. Actors such as James Caan, who Bob Evans made his career through films such as The Godfather. They're involved directly in that situation, the drug dealing mobsters and whatnot. In fact, Caan puts up his home as bail for one of those mobsters, and the other mobster he would later hide in his home while the dude was on the run. That dude was on the run at the same time that Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman are getting murdered. So these things didn't happen in a vacuum. These people definitely know each other, despite their claims otherwise. When they say we don't know each other, these people definitely know each other. They all surround this OJ situation, and there's murders, going all around the situation from coast to coast surrounding these people in the immediate aftermath of this. That kind of goes, to my opinion, to the Idaho 4 situation. Again, you have Caden Young, who has the hotshot overdose in March of 2023, so approximately four and a half months, following the Idaho 4 murders on November 13th, 2022. And then you have Hudson Lindau, another Greek organization student, fraternity member there at University of Idaho, who dies on April 30th, 2022. So approximately 6 months before the Idaho 4 murders. And I don't know if there's any evidence, not that I've seen, that Caden Young knew or was friends with the murder victims there at 1122 King Road. Presumably, they at least knew of each other. He's a fraternity president in the same system. I know not all these fraternities and sororities necessarily are teamed up together, but they all socialize within a network and they all socialize together. So to imply that these folks didn't know each other, as the claims always go, they most certainly would have known each other. Now, Hudson Lindau most certainly seems to have known these folks, the murder victims, the Idaho 4. He was allegedly at the same party with them the night he disappeared, but is found on the interwebs. He's seen in photographs standing right in front of the 1122 King Road house. So, there's obviously some social circle connections there. Whether or not they're at the party is a different story, but he's found dead on May 1st in a few inches of water, allegedly drowned. Now, they claimed accidental drowning, Kathy Mabutt, that is. And, I don't know if there's any investigation past that. If it's if it's marked as an accidental drowning, there's not likely any further autopsy study. I don't know that I've never seen any record that a further autopsy study had been done in Lindau. Oftentimes in a lot of these smiley face killer circumstances, the families order an additional, private autopsy, and that's when they're finding things such as the GHB that are drugging these kids or young men. And I don't know if there any such further investigation went into Lindau, but most likely not, because it was marked accidental drowning. But in a few inches of water, and again, it certainly seems like smiley face killer type activities. I would actually assert, especially in consideration of the murders, consider all at once. There, you have the Idaho 4 murders, you have Greek students, hotshot, potential drug trafficking channels all the way up in Seattle afterwards, in the months after the murders. any of murders proceeding with Hudson Lindale, I would just say it's likely enterprising, Greek students, fraternity brothers, who would be responsible for staging such a death. And that's to say that they even had to stage it, because they may have just dumped the guy there knowing that there's going to be no investigation, because there's no investigation really into the Idaho 4 situation. So as far as looking into other fraternity students, I mean, some of the folks that probably should have had a focus on just questioning these people and their activities didn't seem to be, because law enforcement made it a kind of a debacle. Speaking of a circus, they made it a circus trying to consider where all the roommates were that night, who was where, and what were they doing, to the point where they were cagey about all these circumstances for weeks, if not months, following the murders. And quite honestly, still to this day, because playing all the games where the location of the surviving roommates were they on the first floor? Was one of them on the second floor, Dylan Mortensen? Were they even there? I've asked that question from day one, because when Police Chief James Fry was asked in his first press conference 3 days following the murders, the reporter said, "Oh, so this was a hostage situation?" He said, "I didn't say that." Yeah, he didn't say a lot of things. So very cagey about the locations of these folks. But, it's, so anyhow, lost my train of thought there, rambling about the chief. I was just picturing the Chief Fry press conference, and, the idea that even went on is kind of preposterous to me, because, they waited 3 days. Well, that's a good jumping off point for the media, kind of the media thing here. I want to compare as well here between these two cases. So these are large scale, these, broader topics here I just discussed. Those are kind of what I see as the comparison. I'll go over some of the reasons why OJ did not do it here as well. But with this media campaign, it's really not even just the media campaign. It's the power behind these media campaigns, right? And it's the way that, like, James Fry and other authorities can get away with not having a press conference for 3 days. So what is that, November 16th? And their last press conference with reporters, I believe, was November 24th. After that, they had by appointment only, and it was typically just one-on-one with either Lanier or Fry or that Snell fellow from ISP. It was very secluded, and I believe one of the reporters at that time, so after Thanksgiving 2022, they cut off just doing any media reporting sometime in December, and we're just doing press releases. But my point being here is this censoring of activities of the media, even the not, getting away with not having a press conference, cutting off the media, saying, we're not going to have any more reporters here. We'll just tell you what we're going to say. You guys just print what we write. And that's what they did. When it came down to later in December, when it came to the press releases, the media was literally just reporting the press releases. There was no questions. This is the time where no one had heard Brian Kohberger's name. There was no questions by the media. So, what I'm getting at is, it's not only just the media campaign to convict both Kohberger or OJ. It's clearly the power that exists behind the ability to do these things, right? Like, there was not really a lot of backlash from the media. Like, again, they were cut off. Like, Moscow PD we're not doing any more press conferences with reporters at Thanksgiving. And then they were like, no, we're not doing any more. We'll do some one-on-ones, but you got to send us the questions. That's apparently how it went down. And then after that, it was, we're not even going to talk to you people. We're just going to send you some propaganda, and you print it, So that there's a lot of power, not only to balls to do that, right? The testicular fortitude in which to actually do those things, but also to get away with it, like to not really have any pushback, to never have to answer for yourselves or accountability, right? To never have to provide substance for how you determined it was a isolated targeted attack in your first press conference on day 3. Never had to justify these things. So the same media campaign, or the power, it seems, right, to not only to convey this media circus, because OJ Simpson was that murder trial was kind of the first. It wasn't I don't think it was the first televised, but it was certainly the first court case that was televised, especially internationally, like the Idaho 4 case. It's grasped international attention of everyone, but it was the first court case, I believe, live televised throughout the whole trial, which was, I think, from start to finish, like a year. So the power, I mean, obviously, so even on its face like that, it kind of seems like forced upon everybody. And I think there's, you get different motives for these different cases and whatnot behind the impetus behind incriminating these different suspects. I don't think Brian Koberg is involved in cocaine trafficking with the mafia or anything else like that through Italian restaurants in Brentwood. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that the media, there's, these things manifest in different ways, right? And the OJ case had different impetus, but like it was used as a media circus for utilitarian purposes, not for just one purpose, right? So, one of those is obviously racial divide. It was one of the most, to this day, there's news media articles citing that. But the other thing, it was, the fact that they can keep this campaign going from 1995 through 2025. I mean, that's a lot of power. That's a lot of power. So I just think that's interesting, the power behind these situations and the way they're presented in the media. But yeah, so I'll go over some of these, unpack some of these categories I've identified here for the similarities between the two, and in the process also demonstrate how OJ did not do it. It's pretty clear by the evidence. Again, it's weird. It's weird how the evidence was framed. So the evidence was framed like, again, some evidence was focused on and other evidence wasn't, and again, that some of that could be left for interpretation as far as the defense took a different strategy. However, it's obviously going on here in the Idaho 4 case too, right? Already with the news media's new discoveries, which were old discoveries, which was the unidentified DNA of two other personnel, two other people that were located at the scene. Those were recently new discoveries, despite not new discoveries by the court records. If this fingernail stuff, the DNA under the fingernails of victims, bores out to be, somewhat substantive, and as far as evidence goes in the case, it seems like it'd be exculpatory for Koberger. If that was Koberger's DNA, wouldn't be the first time we're hearing about it. Nonetheless, it goes to show that some evidence is being focused on here in this case, and some evidence isn't, despite the obvious relevant nature of the evidence. And before I get into why OJ didn't do it, I'll recap folks of the interwebs on some characters here in the OJ case. It's interesting how these networks, I talked about it recently in my esoteric and or occult review of Pizza Man, last week's show here on Operation GCD. Was joined by Nick of the Occult Rejects and the Headless Giant, and the talked about a number of characters in there related to Jeffrey Epstein, including some financial transactions revolving around a guy named Michael Milken. Well, Jeffrey Epstein and Michael Milken are connected to characters in today's tale, largely through the attorneys, OJ's Dream Team, right? But I'll go through some of these characters here to bring folks up to speed, because I'm sure a lot of folks are hip to a lot of this stuff because of the ongoing propaganda campaigns to convict OJ Simpson in the court of public opinion, and again, popular Netflix movies and whatnot. So F. Lee Bailey, interestingly enough, part of the OJ Dream Team, represented a number of folks over the years. High-profile cases: Boston Strangler, the Melee Massacre commander there in the late 60s, Patty Hearst, the Symbionese Liberation Army kidnapped Patty Hearst and robbed some shit. That was her attorney. But F. Lee Bailey is connected directly to the BCCI scandal, the CIA cocaine trafficking bank in the, it was actually the CIA Vatican joint ownership, I believe, trafficking bank in the Bahamas, Miami, Florida, in the Bahamas. He was the director of a subsidiary bank that BCCI owned 28% of. Now that sounds strikingly similar to the Idaho 4 situation. What I allege may in fact be going on in and around the Idaho 4 situation. You have, I'll take a quick side route here to make that point. But you have it surrounding the Farmington State Bank and Sam Bankman-Fried and his buddy John Shalopin. He's the head of Deltec Bank, located down there out of the Bahamas, same place FTX was also located out of. Nonetheless, this guy's got connections. Besides being the creator of the cartoon Inspector Gadget, amongst other cartoons, he's got those connections to the BCCI scandal. So we got F. Lee Bailey directly involved in the BCCI scandal, and as a director of a bank that was owned by BCCI. So this guy owns a bank, right? And then FTX owns, well, they don't own a bank, they own a cryptocurrency exchange, which in a sense is they operated kind of like a bank, especially when they're producing their own coin. They both get together, this fella, this creepy French guy, and Sam Bankman-Fried, and they buy out Farmington State Bank in 2020. So that's would later change to Moonstone Bank, and Moonstone Bank would later have a large portion of its funds seized by the feds in a what apparently is a money laundering operation. It was being operated out of there. Not only that, on top of the $60 million I believe they seized from Farmington State Banks / Moonstone, creepy French dude, Jean Shalopin, he had his bank down there in the Bahamas. The U.S. Secret Service seizes funds from Bahamian bank Deltec amid fraud investigation. So I don't know that all these things have really come to fruition, with Sam Bankman-Fried still sitting in a Manhattan jail with his buddy P. Diddy. They're cellmates. They have the same attorneys too, strangely enough. And P. Diddy has strange connections to Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, oddly enough as well. Nonetheless, I don't think all this stuff's really bore out yet, but clearly a lot of money laundering operations going on, not just FTX, but at the Deltec Bank and their joint venture, which was Farmington State turned Moonstone Bank. And F. Lee Bailey kind of falls in that same category of activity. So he was the director of something called Centrust Bank, and it was 28% owned by BCCI, the Bank of Credit and Commerce International. That's the Vatican CIA. Speaking of joint partnerships, there's a good one. Vatican CIA cocaine trafficking, money laundering out of the Bahamas. That one, I don't think anyone ever got in prison for that. A couple folks died, of course, but I believe the archbishop there that was responsible for the Vatican Bank, an American fella, Paul Marchenko, I believe he died an old man in Arizona. So anyhow, the F. Lee Bailey's in the congressional hearings for BCCI because he was the director of this bank for some reason. And that bank was in part owned by BCCI, which again is very strikingly similar to the circumstances surrounding Sam Bankman-Fried's purchase and that creepy French fella, their purchase of Moonstone. It would be a kind of a very similar circumstance, it sounds like. So you got F. Lee Bailey. I don't know why they don't have these in order. I'm just going to go through them in order, though, as the Dream Team. You got old Johnny Cochran here. Now, Johnny Cochran's interesting, much like Robert Shapiro, the next member of the Dream Team. They both would write a book in the immediate aftermath of the trial, and lots of information that never made it to the trial. Again, was it a defense strategy that got shifted? Did they intentionally ignore these aspects? I don't know. But it kind of speaks to maybe some agreements were made of like, we're going to bring these things up in trial and not. But that being said, they did bring other things up in trial that were denied, including Mark Fuhrman's drive over to the OJ Simpson house immediately after discovering the bodies of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman. So Fuhrman was the responding officer at the scene, him and a fellow by the name of Detective Phillips. They were both junior grade detectives in the LAPD robbery homicide unit there. They were the first on scenes on the Bundy Drive residence of Nicole Brown Simpson, where the murder scene of Ron Goldman and Nicole Brown Simpson was, and apparently they left. So his story later would be that he got to the scene and then saw the bodies and then stood out in the middle of the road for about an hour and 15. That's bullshit. So it would later come out. Those are some of his initial statements, because he's standing out in the middle of the road because Van Adder and Lang, the two lead detectives, come on the scene, and back to the connections between the two circuses in LA County, the Manson trial, and essentially 32 years prior, 33 years prior, in the OJ trial. There's multiple connections between these two trials, or characters involved in these cases, not the least of which the two lead detectives. I believe it was Philip Van Adder was a rookie cop on the scene of the Manson murders back there in '69. So the Manson family murders. So, a lot of other activities in between, including he was the guy that arrested Roman Polanski, Sharon Tate's husband or fiance there. He's the guy that arrested Polanski for that rape of the 13-year-old girl in 1977. However, not charged in that case. I mean, they charged Polanski for the rape, but not charged for any sort of obstruction, right? In that case, Jack Nicholson and Cocaine Bob Evans. Once again, Cocaine Bob's always rearing his ugly head. So, and they were on record cleaning up the aftermath of said rape there at Nicholson's house, and Cocaine Bob was notorious for helping clean up the whole scene, a fixer, if you will. But it occurred there at Nicholson's house. But nonetheless, Cocaine Bob, he skirted a lot of charges a lot of times. He did get busted for large-scale drug trafficking in 1980 and I believe 80 or 81, and gave himself the name Cocaine Bob. He said he would forever be known as Cocaine Bob Evans, and I agree. Not to be confused with the Sausage King of Ohio, Bob Evans. That's why there's a clear delineation. You got Cocaine Bob and the Sausage King of Ohio, Bob Evans, the restaurant. Cocaine Bob, but yeah, so he's everywhere, and so is Van Adder. So a lot of these people all know each other. You know what I mean? Despite their claims otherwise. But so some of the details that come out in the Cochran situation, pretty telling. Again, including this alleged or this apparent evidence that didn't make it to trial, where Fuhrman is running over to the. He's essentially setting the stage, it seems, right? So he sees, as the story goes, at least, again, I think this was largely coordinated in advance, but he's convincing everybody. Not everybody's on the take there that he's working with on LAPD. So, but he's the guy on the inside generating the whole narrative from the beginning, and he largely blows up the entire trial for both sides. I mean, he made it a very tough trial for the prosecution and the defense. Nonetheless, and again, he seems to have been planting evidence, etc. But the fact that he runs over there to the Simpson house and claims to have never left the murder scene. So he left the scene of a crime. He saw the bodies, left the scene of a crime, went over there, called dispatch. There's a record of that. A witness, the neighbor of Simpson, sees them arguing in the street outside the home, outside the gate of Simpson's home. Doesn't make it the trial. So stuff like that's, I thought was interesting. When you're looking at this dream team, like, what did that dream team do for him? I mean, sure, they got him out of jail, I guess, but he was essentially a prisoner of the court of public opinion, right? They convicted him of murder back in 94, so 95. So he lived the rest of his life like that, right? I mean, I remember, again, I'm not saying OJ Simpson was a saint, right? It's not all out. Just saying he didn't murder anybody, right? So I do remember an incident. He was at the Kentucky Derby a number of years back, and a dude who's a restaurateur in that area, connected to the mob, strange enough, with these Italian restaurateurs connected to the mob. That's this guy. His name's Jeff Ruby, a big time restaurant guy in Cincinnati, but this is a spot he had in Louisville, and it was at the Kentucky Derby, and he famously threw Simpson out of his restaurant, I recall. I'm sure Simpson encountered a lot of those things over the years. Again, the court of public opinion convicted him as a murderer, despite the evidence. So this dream team, I don't know. I don't know about their motives. At times, again, it's tough to tell because it could have been legal strategy, it could have been intentional, but they certainly did not seem to want to get the truth of the circumstances out. That's for sure. Maybe get OJ off the charges. Sure, I can buy that. But as far as actually figure out what went on here, I don't think that was in anybody's interest. In fact, I think some of these folks were there to make sure folks didn't know what went on there. Folks like old Jeffrey Epstein's buddy, Alan Dershowitz. So old Alan Dershowitz here, part of the dream team. Oh, that reminds me, before I get any further, now I just thought about the Pizza Man and other connections like that. That bank that F. Lee Bailey was the director of, one of their primary customers was Drexel Burnham Lambert. That's that Michael Milliken guy that was in the Pizza Man movie. And Michael Milliken's buddy is Leon Black, who's deeply entwined with the Epstein situation. So Milliken went to prison. Leon Black walks. Him and Epstein very tight. Leon Black's paid out tens of millions of dollars in settling lawsuits related to victims of the Epstein situation. And it's interesting because, again, just to rehash some of those points real quick now that I think about it, with this Drexel Burnham Lambert situation, Michael Milliken goes to prison. His buddy Leon Black walks on this Ponzi scheme, this huge Ponzi scheme, right? I think it surpassed the previous Ponzi scheme on Wall Street, which was Jeffrey Epstein's Ponzi scheme with his buddy Steve Hoffenberger, which was about $450 million. So and Hoffenberger goes to prison, and Epstein walks on that. Epstein paid no restitution, spent no jail time on that Ponzi scheme. His partner did 17 years and paid all full restitution. I don't think Milliken paid full restitution. He paid restitution, and he did, I think, 10 years. So, it's funny this situation where these guys walk and who walks and who doesn't walk, right? And who pays restitution, who doesn't. But nonetheless, Centrust, all those junk bonds that Michael Milliken was selling, that this Ponzi scheme that he was involved in, Centrust was heavily invested into that Ponzi scheme. So, not exactly sure where that falls out of who's doing what in there, but it's strange that's connected to me. That this bank that F. Lee Bailey is running, that's connected to BCCI, is also connected to that recent conversation here, last week's conversation here on Operation GCD. But yeah, so Dershowitz, endless tales of tomfoolery with that guy, including shortly after the Prince Andrew scandal started popping off with the Virginia Giuffre victim. I believe it was a 60 Minutes. I don't know if it was UK 60 Minutes or American 60 Minutes. I think it was 60 Minutes. They did an interview with Alan Dershowitz. He's going to smooth things over for everybody. And in the background of that interview, Alan Dershowitz has what can only be described as a life-size sex doll of an old lady sitting on a couch in the immediate background of the interview. An interview that he's smoothing things over of sex scandals related to Prince Andrew and Jeffrey Epstein. So, I don't know. Creepy son of a bitch, if you ask me. I don't know what that's about, though. I suspect one of the last things you want, though, in that interview is a old granny sex doll in the background. We're trying to tell the world, no, Prince Andrew and Jeffrey Epstein don't rape kids. I don't know, just something about it ain't right. So then you had Dershowitz. Then you had let's see. Oh, Robert Kardashian. How can we forget Keeping Up with the Kardashians? So Robert Kardashian and OJ go way back to his days, I believe, at UCLA there in the early 70s. I believe that's when they became friends. So, that's probably true. A lot of Armenian population there in LA. So I don't know enough about Kardashian's background to know if that's where he went to school, but I'm sure he's from LA. He's Armenian. I don't know. There's a lot to be said probably about Robert Kardashian, but he may have been in my opinion, he may have been the only guy interested in justice, to ensure OJ stayed out of jail. Now, nonetheless, he may have been involved in some of the same nefarious shit that OJ was, because, with the groups of friends that OJ had, his circle of friends, cocaine trafficking, mobsters, process folks, Scientology. I mean, who knows, right? But when I'm assuming Kardashian falls in some of those categories at some point if they're that close to get, closely close friends. So nonetheless, he seemed to be maybe the only one interested in, actually looking out for OJ. I'm not, again, I question some of these other folks' interests because, well, yeah, Barry Scheck. I don't know if you folks of the interwebs are familiar with this character. He was their DNA expert. And, went on to start the Innocence Project. I don't want to get into a diatribe about the Innocence Project, but how many people have they helped? One thing that's not talked about in the Innocence Project is the great liability that the states and other police departments and law enforcement agencies maintain if suddenly all of these people that were wrongly convicted are suing them for being wrongly convicted. So if you look at the kind of the trajectory of the Innocence Project, they came out real hot. They started out real heavy, but it's kind of just kind of tapered off over time because I'm not saying he didn't have malintent from the beginning. I'm just saying, like, at some point in time, I think that whole organization has been more or less compromised, and they put the brakes on a lot of that stuff. Like, wait a second here, we don't want to be letting a lot of wrongly convicted folks out of prison because we don't have a lot of money in our wrongly convicted folks in prison fund. We would have to cut into our cocaine and hookers fund in which to pay these people off, and we're not going to do that. I'm assuming that's what the budgetary discussions that exist at the state level in many of these states. But nonetheless, Barry Scheck, integral part of the dream team as far as the DNA stuff went down, and it became a big. I mean, DNA was kind of the topic of conversation of the whole case, and Robert Shapiro got a knife out there, do you, Bob? This guy was deadly, wielding a knife or not. This dude was in some weird shit, if you ask me. Yeah, this dude's everywhere as far as, much like F. Lee Bailey, again, this dream team, I don't know whose dream they were. It's more of a nightmare team, if you ask me, the shit these guys were into. But yeah, so DNA became the topic of conversation for this whole case and kind of spawned the whole DNA era, right, of forensics and fucking CSIs and, whatever, right? So Shapiro here, Cocaine Bob's friend, of course, he represented Cocaine Bob in the Cotton Club murders, right? So Cocaine Bob was, he should have been charged. He was not charged. His co-conspirators were all charged. He was essentially an unindicted co-conspirator, but he was supposed to testify for the prosecution in the murder of Roy Radin, a guy who, according to folks like author Maury Terry, was the head of the East Coast New York City process operations, or at least in the upper echelon of their operations in New York City. Seemingly, to me, it seems like a turf war. You got the New York City process dude, Hollywood, guy who's trying to get into Hollywood movie production, Roy Radin, and Bob Evans, the West Coast Hollywood process dude, who's already a legendary movie producer. Rosemary's Baby, hired Roman Polanski to make that Satan shitstorm starring Sammy Davis Jr. The Godfather, of course, with his buddy James Caan, who would later harbor known drug trafficking mobsters known to this, surrounding this case. So Cocaine Bob here hires Bob Shapiro to, I don't know for what. I mean, seemingly he could have come up with the same defense himself. So LA County, this is 1989, so a few years, before the murders, 4 years before the murders, roughly. Bob gets called as a prosecution witness against his co-conspirators and the hitman they hired to kill Roy Radin. And again, Maury Terry is deeply involved in that whole, looking at that whole narrative contemporary to the events, or in that investigation. I'm sorry. So that was 84, I think, was the murder. So 89 is when the charges are coming down and the trials and whatnot. And Bob gets called as a prosecution witness and pleads the fifth as a prosecution witness. So apparently that was on the advice of old Robert Shapiro here, part of the dream team. Now that's a strange time to plead the fifth when you're an unindicted co-conspirator in a murder trial, but that's what Bob did. Old Cocaine Bob. Strangely enough, he's not the only person to plead the fifth. We'll get to that in a second relative to Mark Fuhrman, because he pled the fifth as a detective in this case, which is very odd. But so that's the dream team that OJ had. Again, it's more of a nightmare team, if you ask me, but I guess he did stay out of jail. So that's, to some degree, it's a notable achievement, I guess. Although, again, I'm not convinced that anyone wanted anyone in jail. Like, to a certain extent, And I don't want to go all full blown process on you folks of the interwebs here tonight, but I can't ignore the fact that the Process Church, the chaos cult, who is known to create chaos largely around racial divides, may have achieved a goal here with some of their white nationalist constituents like Mark Fuhrman and other elements of nefarious underworld like cocaine traffickers and mafia folks, and assisting and supporting that endeavor. But again, OJ Simpson and the media campaign to convict OJ Simpson was all based on racial stuff. I mean, he created an enormous racial divide to the point where you can see here on the Time magazine cover that they published back there in '94, they intentionally made him darker. Like, I don't know. I mean, it seems to be like a ploy to even stoke, to emphasize this racial narrative that they're trying to perpetrate, right? I'm not saying it's going to achieve that. What I'm saying is this seems to indicate to me that this was their goal, was to try to create some sort of racial divide out of the entire, the entire case. So yeah, I don't know. When it gets, again, when you have so many Scientologists rolling around the situation, mafia, Nazis, Process Church, I'm like, well, I mean, this shit's show of a circus. Anything could be going on, but what doesn't seem to be going on was the legitimate effort and objective effort into the investigation and subsequent trials of the actual offenders of these crimes. So I have to say, do they really want OJ in jail, or do they just really want to use him as a pawn in a fucking, racial boondoggle of a, court case? Again, a circus that hadn't been seen in LA County since the Manson trials, and not on the main list of characters, but I'll get to him next as far as the cast of characters in this case. Another cast of character directly related to the Manson case. But the let's see here, Denise Brown. She was a key witness in the investigation. Nicole Brown Simpson's sister, testifying that OJ was a violent domestic abuser. By all appearances, he was. And again, I'm not trying to defend OJ Simpson. By all appearances, he bailed his ex-wife out of numerous drug debts and cocaine trafficking, and quite seemingly, was surrounded by it. He may have been involved in it himself, considering his best friend Al Cowens, the driver of the white Bronco, also involved in cocaine trafficking and mafia activity. So again, I'm not saying OJ is a saint. What I'm saying here is, this was what they used, was the targeting of the domestic violence, obviously to convict him as a crazy ex-husband, etc. I'm not saying he didn't beat her, his ex-wife. He's clearly, they had a lot of domestic cases. Clearly beat her in at least one of those. Very violent 911 call about 8 months before the murders in October of '93, where he's beating down a door and hooting and hollering in her house there in Bundy, talking about cocaine and hookers again. So he's very upset with her about cocaine and hookers. And Nicole tells the 911 operator he's mad at something from the past again. So there's been, I'm not saying it's a legitimate reason, but it seems like OJ at times wanted to bail his mother, the mother of his children, out from cocaine debts, and maybe other times lost his mind over that. Who knows? But Denise Brown's an interesting character. Her boyfriend at the time, a Los Angeles mafia hitman. She was a key witness in the case again. So it's interesting again what the prosecution focused on and what the defense focused on. But relative to the prosecution, the elements they focused on. I mean, there was no objective investigation into the evidence. Again, they backtracked timelines, planted evidence. Get into more of that in a minute. But they planted evidence. But the the things they did focus on seemingly are somewhat telling. Almost like she has to play along, or maybe she might get some charges or something, because her boyfriend is all up in this cocaine trafficking business and was a mafia hitman there in Los Angeles by the name of, oh shoot, you might as well just insert like a meatball name here, because I don't recall the guy's name off the top of my head. But give me a second here. I saved it here somewhere. There we go. Anthony Fiato. I couldn't remember, was the Fiato or Fato brothers, because there's other mobsters in this story that the LAPD at one point in time brings in two mobsters to substantiate claims by the lead detective in the case, Philip Van Adder, that OJ Simpson wasn't targeted. So like, I'll get, it's preposterous. But yeah, at one point in time in the year-long proceedings of the trial, LAPD was at one point in time, the prosecution was like, you know what, this is not looking good for us. Let's bring in those two mobsters, those FBI informant, mobster dudes, and we'll tell them, and they'll come on the stand and say that Philip Van Adder told them, months after the arrest of Simpson that, of course they're going to investigate Simpson. They always investigate the husband or something like that. But, basically trying to claim that Simpson wasn't targeted by using two mobsters to substantiate that claim. So the mobsters surrounding this tale are crazy. The fact that they're in the court transcript, they testified, like, I don't think that was in a Netflix documentary or movie. But yeah, Craig Anthony Fiato here. Apparently he would later go, I believe he would later go on to discuss these matters of, here we go. On Howard, I knew a radio show was Howard Stern. So Fiato became a tabloid celebrity. Wikipedia, the source of all information on the interwebs. So feel free to check out this link here. But yeah, on the LA Times. No, we'll do it right now here. Yeah, I thought so. It's a subscription. But yeah, apparently he went on the Howard Stern show, even talking about his relationship to Nicole Brown's sister, Denise Brown. That seems strange, Has no problem bragging about these things, apparently. Before let's just finish off the other characters here as I describe more of these ridiculous details surrounding this case. But I don't know that we have mobsters surrounding the Idaho 4 case. But what it seems that may be involved there relative to the drug trafficking, that is Mexican cartel. There's been a lot of Mexican cartel stuff going on over there in Pullman, Washington, in around the time of the murders. So including a Mexican cartel leader busted over there for cocaine trafficking in around the Pullman area. Marcia Clark, LA County prosecutor and Scientologist. So a lot of these characters, and we've kind of already seen it to a certain extent in Idaho. More so, they're kind of jumping ship before the trial. Chief Fry retired. Captain Roger Lanier retired. Wouldn't be surprised if Bill Thompson tries to retire. I believe John Judge is retiring. Marcia Clark here and her co-prosecutor, assistant deputy attorney from Los Angeles County, Christopher Darden, is up next. They both left the prosecutor's office following the case. Philip Van Adder, the lead detective, retires. Tom Lang retires, the co-lead detective. Mark Fuhrman retires after a 40-some page internal affairs investigation into him being a Nazi that was going on during the trial, and Marcia Clark here most certainly knew about. So these elements, again, focusing on, that's kind of what I get at with the Koberger case too. So focusing on what the, not only just the media campaign narrative, but like kind of even comparing the media narrative to convict these, Koberger or Simpson, but Koberger in this reference, the media narrative versus whatever they're trying to sell in court narrative, right? And especially like when those things don't match up, and then you see circumstances like in the OJ case here, where the prosecutors knew that Fuhrman was going to come, blow up their entire case with his tomfoolery. They knew he was a Nazi from this internal affairs investigation report. Prosecutors told of Fuhrman bias. This is from 95. This is from September. The trial's still going on. I don't think the trial ended at the end of the month there in September of 95. So the murders were in June, and the trial ended, we went from September 94 to September 95. As far as the actual proceedings, I believe they started in January 95. But nonetheless, like, it really makes you wonder again about what goes on with this prosecution. Now, I'm not saying that the state's necessarily ignoring evidence in the Idaho 4 case that could convict Koberger, because that doesn't seem to be the case at all. But what it does seem to be the case is that suppose the unscrupulous nature of these prosecution's office, right? Like, it seems like Marcia Clark, Scientologist, married to Scientologists and deeply surrounded by Scientologist activities. Her second husband was an executive in the church. So very not a somewhat of a powerful position, obviously, and seemingly, married to somebody in a powerful position such as her. I think it creates an interesting dynamic. Nonetheless, it does seem to be that regardless of it's a prosecution office of Bill Thompson or the Idaho State, Attorney General's office, I question the ethics and morals of a lot of these activities. But nonetheless, Marsha Clark here, she left. All lead detectives left. Then you got Christopher Darden. He really didn't bring much to the table. And of course, Mark Fuhrman. Who else we got here? Gil Garcetti. He was the mayor. We got mayor. Let's see. We got the Goldmans. Lance Ito. I don't have a lot to say about Lance Ito other than he looks silly, doesn't he? Kind of looks like a Pop Funko figure. Cato Kalin. This guy. Again, he didn't serve well for the prosecution. He was a prosecution witness that was like, I'm going to change my story. See how you guys like that. Now, he's often described, there's this infamous bump that occurs at 1040 that largely is, presumed to be incriminating towards Simpson. I don't know about that. This guy shouldn't be believed. If anything, I know there's claims, of other, that this occurred. Whether or not it occurred or not doesn't mean it was Simpson. And there's other reasons to substantiate that it wasn't Simpson. But later they would find the bloody glove there. When I say they, Mark Fuhrman. So, Mark Fuhrman's an interesting character because he surrounds the key pieces of evidence. And again, back to the things they may not have covered in the trial, but were relevant. Mark Fuhrman's name was not apparent to the defense team for some months. He did not, despite being the responding officer on scene, despite running over to the Simpson residence before, they officially ran over to the Simpson residence in the police record. And actually, in that, it would come out in trial later that Fuhrman knew exactly where Simpson's house was and led everybody over there at whatever hour that was, 3-something in the morning, 3:15. The murders occurred at 10:30, 10:42 time frame. So, hours later, he responds there at 2:00, goes back to the scene, and allegedly takes everybody back over there at like 3:15. Nonetheless, he's the one that finds the blood in the Bronco. He's the one that finds the bloody glove. The bloody glove sitting behind Cato Kalin's guest house, where that they later would allege the 1040 knock was OJ Simpson jumping over the fence in which to get in to his estate because he had to park his Bronco out on the street, and the limo driver was in the gate in the driveway. So he allegedly, in an effort to avoid the limo driver, he runs around the side. Again, the timelines of these things simply do not comport. Again, much like the Kohberger situation, they do not comport to the facts. Again, Kohberger is doing superhuman things, and allegedly, according to the state of Idaho, to murder four young adults, and do so in a stealthy manner, nonetheless, in an improbable timeline. OJ Simpson's, alleged of these same superhero feats. But yeah, Cato Kalin, he's interesting because he's out there still perpetrating some of these media campaigns today, right? So, it is weird to me that, and again, we've seen folks in the Idaho 4 situation retiring or not. Whether or not they're going to start writing books, whether or not Brett Payne's going to start writing a book is yet to be seen. However, all of these guys, in the detectives in the case and the prosecutors decided immediately following the case resolving in 95 there in the fall, they immediately start printing books. Mark Fuhrman, again, Murder in Brentwood, December 1st, 1997 published, right? This is Looney Tunes. This is absolutely Looney Tunes. Mark Fuhrman is a convicted felon by this point, forced into retirement from the LAPD, identified as a Nazi, accurately, and somehow, again, he's publishing books like just brushing it off his shoulders. I mean, this Mark Fuhrman, I tell you what. But yeah, Mark Fuhrman's October 2nd, 1996 plea agreement to felony perjury at the OJ Simpson criminal trial. So this is after his termination or his quote unquote retirement there from quote unquote termination from LAPD. But before that book's published, it should say author Mark Fuhrman, convicted felon and Nazi. But yeah, so he writes that book, and then Van Adder and Tom Lang get together, and then they write Evidence Dismissed, and that's released in the next month in February of '97. So this is their inside story of the police investigation of OJ Simpson. I'm sorry, I thought that was the trial. I thought the trial was the story. There's an inside story. Why didn't you guys present the inside story at trial? We got the outside story. That doesn't make any sense. And again, these two guys, interesting bunch. Tom Lang would, testify in support of a gangster, Middle Eastern gangster, maybe Lebanese, perhaps. I don't recall. Fellow by the name of Eddie Nash, went by the name of Eddie Nash, who was related. He was apparently the guy that ordered the 4 on the floor murders, the Wonderland murders, back in '81, the John Holmes murders. Lang would, despite being the detective on the case, Lang would say, "Oh, this guy's not a bad guy." Van Adder, of course, like I said, on the scene at the Manson family murders as a rookie cop, arrested Roman Polanski. I don't think either one of them were involved in the Cotton Club murders, but now that I think about it, I don't know that for certain. The Cotton Club murders being the Roy Raiden murder with old Cocaine Bob there. But yeah, these guys, interesting bunch. And again, they're writing books of apparent inside stories, right? Marsh Clark, 1997, without a doubt. Without a doubt, you did an awful job. That's the only, without a doubt. What she wrote in this book, Lord knows what. Because, again, she, it's not, again, I look at the way that the two sides fought over different subjects throughout the whole court case, and again, I wonder what was the purpose here, because she did an awful job, including Fuhrman, and any of this stuff was, they had to have known. Again, they knew what he was. Like, they knew the complaints against him. They knew of the internal affairs situation. They knew that he didn't initially file a report. So despite being on scene, despite being mentioned being on scene, no one knew he was so integral in finding the key pieces of evidence for some time, because he never was forced to write a report. Everyone else wrote a report. Mark Fuhrman didn't write a report. Marsh Clark would later argue in court that's because the police removed him from the team within an hour of the discovery of the bodies. Well, that's not true. That's not true at all. Their own reports show that's not true. So these schizo reports seem like a common thread between both these cases as well, where you see the schizo reports of actions such as that with Fuhrman, or the schizo reports that are in the Idaho 4 situation, not the least of which is the shoe print the forgotten shoe print, the van shoe print that never was, the one that was included in search warrants, as evidence to substantiate search warrants, a latent shoe print that was discovered in the murder home, which the schizo nature of that report being that in order to be a latent print, that means that the law enforcement authorities over there in Idaho used a powder and a chemical in which to produce that print because the floor had been cleaned. So in their reports, doesn't say anything about any cleaning of crime scenes. They don't account for that whatsoever. That's not included in Koberger's superhero timeline. However, the schizo nature of that being a latent print means that it was clean. So nonetheless, that doesn't matter. No one's there, pay no attention to the van shoe print. So the fact that Marcia Clark is doing these odd things with evidence in the case, kind of that same dubious nature, like it's, including Fuhrman and some of the Fuhrman related activities. It's very bizarre, very bizarre. But then Christopher Darden writes a book. Of course, he's got to get in there, right? He doesn't wait. He gets to the table January 1st, 96. The case has only been over for a few months. And then, of course, he's not the first one at the table. Cato Kalin, of course, wrote a book. He prints his mid-trial. I think they sat the jury. I think the initial preliminary proceedings were September. This is January of 94. This is January 95. The actual proceedings just had begun, I believe. He hadn't testified yet. It's just a weird media campaign around this stuff. And again, to a certain extent, we're seeing this with the Idaho 4 situation. We got 48 hours. We got date lines on Brian Koberger did it. Dateline. Brian Koberger did it 48 hours. These aren't objective. These are not objective views into whether or not he did or not. They're just, it's the same as the inside story of the OJ case written by the lead detectives who forgot to tell the inside story in their own reports in the murder trial. It's propaganda. And then again, you have the quote unquote dream team divulging details after the case. Seems, I mean, again, to me, in hindsight, at least, it seemed to have been relevant during the case again. In some instances, like I said, the call where Fuhrman runs over there and calls dispatch and the witnesses that saw him, none of that stuff was allowed in. So to a certain extent, Judge Ito, served someone's role keeping that stuff out. It certainly wasn't the role of justice, though, right? It wasn't objectivity or justice. Now, you have a number of, so a lot of this stuff is when I'm asserting that OJ clearly did not do it based upon the evidence, the established evidence, right? Like, not that we found these blood drops, right? We found blood drops in the Bronco. There's the bloody glove behind the gate, the guest house over the fence around the corner from the Bronco, right? On the Simpson estate on Rockingham. Well, there's no blood trail in between, right? Philip Van Adder would testify to that in the court case. You find these, kind of blood drops kind of just strewn about in various spots, but not where you'd expect them to be, like from the blood trail from the Bronco to the bloody glove and et cetera, et cetera. And strangely enough, old Philip Van Adder this would come out after the trial during the civil depositions from the LAPD criminologist, the guy in charge of the criminology lab. He would testify that Philip Van Adder had signed out Simpson's blood. Simpson gave his blood day one voluntarily. That should be noted. He had a vial of Simpson's blood and vials of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman's blood in his pocket, walking around the crime scene for upwards of 3 days. So that would have become an issue in trial, not really focused on too much by the media and perhaps not stressed enough by the defense, but that would become an issue in trial because some of OJ's blood was missing some of the blood was missing from those vials. And it certainly seems like those blood drops and the mixtures of these blood drops were the product, and I believe the jury found it to be as well, were the product of the work of Philip Van Adder, lead detective robbery homicide there, LAPD. So a lot of that stuff is kind of addressed here in these books that have been, again, they were written at the time, right? This isn't new information. The only new information is the fact that this media campaign to convict OJ is ongoing. Here's another one, written at the time, Killing Time, the first full investigation of the unsolved murders of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman. And another one. Again, so these aren't really new details, right? Like that's what I'm getting at, is the power behind these campaigns. The campaign to convict Koberger, the campaign that convicted Simpson, despite all of the evidence in the tomfoolery that was being played out. One of the guys who wrote one of these early books was this guy, Stephen Singular, Legacy of Deception, an investigation of Mark Fuhrman and fascism in the LAPD. This is an interesting story. This goes directly into Fuhrman being connected into the Idaho situation where he retired to in 95. This fella, Stephen Singular, gets is that his name? Yes, Stephen or Stephen, Stephen. He gets a call from LAPD prosecutor's office from an inside, a quote unquote, I guess you could say a whistleblower. And this person won't identify themselves, but they tell him that they read his book about the 1984 murder of Alan Berg, a radio show host in Denver, Colorado, who was murdered by these white nationalists from just north of Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Again, Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, that was the home of Kaylee Gonsalves, Madison Mogan, and their boyfriends. Come from the north side of Coeur d'Alene there. So basically Coeur d'Alene, the next area is Hayden Lake. That's right there, 5-10 miles away from Coeur d'Alene. That's a big Nazi compound associated with this case, and all the way up to Sandpoint, Idaho, which is about 40 miles north of there. And that's where Mark Fuhrman retired to. And again, this LAPD or LA County whistleblower, LA County Prosecutor's Office whistleblower calls Stephen Singular apparently and tells him these details. And that's why they say Fuhrman's directly associated with the white nationalists that you wrote a book about. This murder happened in 1984. Stephen Singular would allege that the murder of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman was almost a 10th year anniversary, almost to the day. This was June 18th. That was June 12th. So within a week. But he would allege that this was a continuation of their same effort to create this kind of race war and this white nationalist group that doesn't care much for the U.S. government and an ongoing war apparently with the U.S. government. But nonetheless, this guy's murdered in Denver. There's bank robberies and other stuff associated with these activities. They're arrested in Sandpoint, Idaho. The folks with that Denver, Colorado murder, a great distance away from one another. I would say roughly 18-hour drive. This story is being told right now in a film, The Order. That's the name of the white nationalist group up there. They got busted for the Allen Berg murder in a new film, The Order. That's their name, is The Order as well. But nonetheless, these stories are being told in Hollywood still to this day, strangely enough. But if this guy gets called, he contacts, he's like, well, why is the prosecutor's office doing something about this? And they said, no one here will touch it. And then they told him to go to the defense with it. So apparently that's again this guy's story. Who contacted the defense and became part of the defense team for a period of time. So the it is interesting that this white nationalist group seems to connect some great distances spanning time. They're saying this dude wrote about this group 10 years prior to the OJ case, and they're saying Fuhrman's connected. And again, it seems to bore out, and once the details come through, that is the case, as the argument laid out in this guy's book, again, contemporary to the time, and involved directly with the defense team. One of those pieces of evidence that he was told, right? So again, there was this evidence that, we're hearing evidence today about fingernail stuff, DNA evidence under victims' fingernails in the Idaho 4 case. There was other evidence that came out later and throughout the proceedings in this case, one of which was this bag and stick that allegedly was used by Fuhrman to plant the bloody glove behind the guest house there on the Simpson property that Cato Kalin lived in. Now, and this was part of that first trip over there, allegedly, right? The trip that wasn't allowed to be admitted into court. So this became, and this is a clip from Court TV talking about the bag and stick Fuhrman used to plant the glove. It got admitted as evidence, and quite honestly, if Marcia Clark did anything, she did a great job at dancing around this subject. But I'll play a brief clip here.
In one of the photographs, there's a stick that was somewhere around the location. We saw it briefly yesterday. I'm not sure it was marked. You remember seeing a stick somewhere out in and around Rockingham that morning?
Yes.
Where was this stick?
There was a piece of splintered wood, if that's what you're referring to, white in color, that was located on the parkway adjacent to the Bronco.
And was this?
So that became an issue. They had to dance around this bag and the stick that was clearly just laying there near the bloody glove. And they're like, well, no one really had any answers for it. And, again, Marcia Clark did get creative there. But they were talking about the blood and near the glove and stuff like that. And like I said, these things came out at trial. Whether or not they were really stressed upon is a different story altogether. And again, I draw into question those type of activities as a result of that. But nonetheless, the point being, their evidence existed clearly that a lot of these things were planted, right? The evidence. Van Adder's got the blood. He would testify. But to that note, so like, when Van Adder goes to the stand or Tom Lane goes to the stand, no one asked them if they planted evidence. The defense would only ask Mark Fuhrman that, right? Which is weird, right? Because they know Van Adder's got the blood, right, in his pockets. They already know that. They know he's walking around the scene, but they don't ask Van Adder, did you plant evidence? So it's a strange juxtaposition there. So when old Fuhrman, I'm deeply involved in the commentary on the Idaho 4 situation from his seemingly white nationalist compound in northern Idaho. I see this article here from this recent article from last March, Ultimate Evil. I was like, oh, that's sends off some Kill Bill sirens in the head there relative to the process, but that's the title here in the article. But it says, former LAPD detective Mark Fuhrman remains in the Idaho college murder case as the mystery-shrouded saga continues. All right. So, and it's obviously not his first commentary on the case. He's been there since kind of day one. This one's from December 2022. You know, providing commentary again there, right? So there's old Mark. You know, no one's asking him, "Hey there, felon, Nazi felon guy, what's your thoughts?" They're just saying, "Hey, here's esteemed, retired LAPD detective Mark Fuhrman." Now again, he didn't leave. Not only did he have the internal affairs report produced some really negative shit, you know, some ardent Nazi activity from the man. He didn't end his career well after pleading the fifth, much like Bob Shapiro told old cocaine Bob Evans to plead the fifth in the Cotton Club murders. Mark Fuhrman's a detective on the case. Again, didn't write a report. You know, was not supposedly involved in the case. Really, was removed an hour into the discovery of the bodies. All that bullshit. So he would later, when asked in his testimony, did you plant any evidence there, Mark? And he would say, "Yeah, no, plead the fifth." Here's a copy of that. And it was a brief exchange. Just says, "I wish to assert my Fifth Amendment privilege. Have you ever falsified a police report? I wish to assert my Fifth Amendment privilege." So, that was a picture of him doing that right there. I just think it's a funny picture of him on the stand. Again, the idea of this dude's pleading the fifth, you know what I mean? Again, on a question like that, but on top of that, the idea that the other detectives are not asked. The guy that had the blood in the pocket, he's not asked about, pleading the fifth. Kind of odd. Of course, the jury never found that out. Things censored from the jury. I'm sure that's going to go on in the Idaho case, right? There's already all of this sealing of documents, censoring from the public in a public court system. Jury won't be told Fuhrman took the fifth. So, seems like a vital detail to tell the jury, hey, they asked this guy if he planted that evidence that they're accusing him of planting. And he's like, hey, I can't do that. That would incriminate myself. So kind of a ridiculous scenario. Things like that could happen with this case, though, with the alleged planting of evidence as well, right? With the Idaho case. Scrutiny follows Fuhrman to Idaho town. So, yeah, back in 95, he's retiring there to Idaho. So one of the things I mentioned before about the knives, the lack thereof, one of the fundamental aspects of a murder case, the murder weapon, Fuhrman would make statements here in recent years regarding such things as that Netflix documentary, stating that he had his own ideas. Old Mr. Perjury Nazi felon guy, he has his own ideas about this knife that they didn't search for, right? There was no extensive search for any knife in the OJ Simpson murder situations here, the murder of Nicole Brown and Ron Goldman. There was no extensive search for the knife for Idaho 4 with Brian Koberger. There's an appearance of an investigation for a knife. There's an appearance of a search. But when I'm saying an extensive search, they know, like Koberger, they know where he went with these cell phones, right? Well, there was no grid searches or walking to search for these areas in large grid patterns that are often seen through standard protocols and law enforcement searches. Didn't happen. Didn't seem to happen here. They did dig in a wooded area near a hotel in Chicago that OJ stayed at that night. OJ flew to Chicago for a pre-planned trip that night with the Hertz car rental folks and their executives and a golf outing the next day. Well, apparently they needed to go search the wooded area around his hotel in Chicago. There wasn't much of a search there in Los Angeles, though. So again, it's the appearance of these searches. But Fuhrman would infer that later, this is a few years ago, that there was an empty knife box sitting on the edge of the master bedroom bathtub. The Swiss Army knife box contained a 4-inch lockback blade. Simpson was a spokesperson for the company for Swiss Army knives. So, why wouldn't he have a knife? This is preposterous. But these are the statements made by old felon Nazi Fuhrman there. He would basically be claiming this 4-inch knife looks like the wounds that has the right depth and thickness and width. That's what he's saying. To be the murder weapon, right? And it just seems so much like the same. His statements seem to have all the hallmarks of the search for the murder weapon, the Idaho 4. With even if you exclude the sheath, like they're like, we just started asking all these shops if you sold a knife. We asked Amazon if they sold knives, and we asked other real retailers if they sold knives. Again, this is an appearance of a search. It's not an actual search, but it's on the same level of preposterousness as was what old Fuhrman's suggesting here. Silly stuff, if you ask me. Silly stuff. So relative to Van Adder and more of this, this perhaps planted evidence and whatnot here, this stuff was, like I said, this didn't come out until after the trial, right? So it makes you wonder, like, why did this not come out until after the trial? So this is criminalist may play vital role in civil case. So this is June of 96. So this is, 8 months after the trial, I believe, at this point. Gary Siglar, a supervising criminalist in the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office, said investigators neglected to take very small form blood droplets from the slashed body of Simpson's ex-wife, according to deposition, blah, 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 blah. And then you go down here and it says, again, they even hit it in this article, right? This became an issue in the civil case, but it's just funny, even in the article, they want to hide it. Sigler noted that the lead detective, Philip Van Adder, personally picked up vials of the victim's blood from the coroner's office just days after the murder. He had those for 3 days. He got Simpson's blood on day one. Simpson willfully gave them his blood sample. So the DNA evidence. I mean, Kerry Mullis never needed to testify in this case regarding this DNA evidence, but it would have been handy, again, with the misuse of PCR tests, which again is what seems to be going on here with the Idaho 4 case, right? Is the misuse of this PCR test. But the Mullis never made it. Mullis never made it to the team, despite volunteering to testify for OJ, the defense team. They started again a media campaign, right? So the media campaign ran against him once he volunteered to be, a defense witness, and that was reported. Suddenly, the media was like, "Oh, this guy does a bunch of LSD. He can't be testifying in cases." They wanted to send him to like a drug rehab clinic. This is really what happened, and it seemed to be one of the focal points for why he didn't testify. Is they wanted to send him to a drug rehab place so that he could get off the LSD and be proper witness, right? Proper expert witness for the trial, which just seems ridiculous, But that's the story of Kerry Mullis. But nonetheless, the DNA is clearly going to play a role here, and again, it's a very similar circumstance with the Mullis. And I don't know if they had vials of blood going around the scene, but I certainly leave it open to possibilities at this point with the other ridiculous stuff that's gone on here in this case. Before I go back over some of the tangential connections with Scientology and some of those characters, though, I want to finish discussing some of the evidence here exhibiting that OJ did not do it. So, FBI, this is 2024. FBI releases OJ Simpson files that have been secret for decades, September 2024, which I think they did it after he died. But so what this information yielded was that that they had clearly been more involved in a lot of the behind the scenes stuff, which again is what I allege is going on here in the Idaho case, right? That, well, I mean, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that and support that. But what I'm saying here is that the FBI is clearly the focal point of all the key pieces of evidence in Idaho 4, and it seems, looking back in Idaho, they had OJ, they had a far larger role in the evidence and the evaluation of the evidence, right? The analysis of the evidence than previously known by the release of those documents. But one of the key pieces of evidence that they used to convict OJ, and again, the jury didn't even buy this one, that Bruno Magel, size 12 loafer that allegedly 5 people owned or whatever, that OJ was one of them. They found that shoe print in blood at the scene. Again, this is all produced by the FBI. Again, the jury did not buy any aspect of this. This was one of those kind of pieces of evidence that would later seem like in this case, the OJ case, the key pieces would come out later. Like the stronger pieces of evidence were not produced for weeks after the crimes, right? Like the more blood-soaked pieces the shoe prints or the shoe prints they didn't test. So, again, so they're focusing on something like this, and again, the jury didn't buy any aspect of this. There was numerous instances and reports of the police officers contaminating the scene with their own shoe prints, and shoe prints that were not tested, including Ron Goldman's shoe, never tested. Ron Goldman's shoe, I'm sorry, didn't make it into trial, but Ron Goldman's shoe was tested and had a mixture of his and Nicole Brown Simpson's blood on the bottom of the shoe. Right. So some of that's not accounted for in their narrative. Right. So that just didn't make it into the trial. Right. The official, back to the establishing the narrative, jamming things in there. And if things can't be jammed, well, it can't be here. That being, Ron Goldman shouldn't, according to their official narrative, should never have had a mixture of his own and Nicole Brown Simpson's blood on his shoe. But, nonetheless, those were the circumstances. Now, I don't want to go like too deep into the graphic nature of any of the injuries, quite honestly, but I will show a couple pictures here to emphasize my point on how OJ did not do it, right? Because much like Koberger and the lack of knife, right? There's also there's no bloody glove. There's no bloody glove. There's no bloody clothes, right? So OJ again in this superhero timeline discarded all of his bloody clothes and the weapon. Koberger did the same thing in his hero timeline. So the comparisons there are very striking. But you can see this is a very bloody scene, right? It's not a very large scene as far as the area in which it encompasses. The area in which it encompasses is fairly small. And you saw that side, and that's kind of facing out away from there, from where she was laying. Is there's Goldman. Goldman put up a fight. Yeah, Nicole Brown Simpson, by all appearances, whatever assailant, slit her neck there. That was by surprise, by all appearances. The story is Goldman came with an envelope. This envelope you see here, which had a shoe print on it. The FBI would later claim was not a shoe print. Didn't match OJ's. The envelope contained a pair of eyeglasses that Nicole Brown Simpson's mother allegedly left at the Mezzaluna restaurant earlier that evening when they were there dining. Goldman, being a waiter from there, borrowed a car from one of the other employees there and dropped this envelope off. And then he apparently stumbled, as the story goes, he stumbled across her murder, and then he was murdered. Again, the state claims by OJ. OJ did not put up this fight. OJ may have been hurdling some Hertz rental car desks in those commercials, but this dude was I believe 25 or 26 years old, and he put up a fight. Not a small guy. I know there's been back and forth over the years whether or not he was a karate guy or not. I don't care. The amount of injuries on this man show that he put up quite a hell of a fight, and I believe he stabbed and slashed and cut over like 12 times during that fight. OJ had this injury. There's OJ's injury. A small cut on his left middle finger, which he claims he cut on he was in his hotel room in Chicago when LAPD called him about 7 a.m. Following the murders. He apparently claims he broke a glass in his fit of panic after the phone call and sliced his finger. So what he certainly didn't do was slice that finger in that brutal fight with Ron Goldman. Again, Ron Goldman hand looked like that. Defensive wounds. OJ had a small cut on his finger. Ron Goldman had, according to his autopsy report, was beat senseless in that process. Not even just the obvious defensive wound or defensive wounds and whatnot. He definitely put up a fight. So according to his autopsy report, again, if you would believe OJ Simpson committed these crimes, regardless of the superhero timelines, you have to believe that he not only murdered his wife, but also managed to put this kind of damage onto Ron Goldman, where he was 25 years old, 170 pounds, 69 inches, crown to sole, it says. It says the head is extensive evidence of external traumatic injury. Nose, eyes, and mouth. Neck shows sharp force injuries to be described below. The front of the chest and abdomen likewise show injuries to be described below. Yada, yada, yada. He had sharp force wound to the neck, multiple stab wounds to the chest, abdomen, left thigh, penetrating stab wounds to the chest and abdomen, multiple incised wounds to the scalp, face, neck, chest, and left hand, defensive wounds, multiple abrasions on upper extremities and hands, defensive wounds. So, by all appearances, Ron Goldman, karate champ or not, put up a hell of a fight. And the evidence shows that in his defensive wounds and et cetera. And, OJ Simpson, a man twice his age, is not doing that and getting nothing but a cut on his finger. That's preposterous. So, a lot of that evidence, again, they forced it in there. So again, this very bloody scene, that's a very condensed scene. So you're no way the killer did not get blood everywhere. He happened to have no blood, but drops, right? Some drops in the Bronco, no drops between the Bronco to the bloody glove on his home property there behind the Cato Kalin guest house, and a cut on his finger, So, but the small drops of blood of the victims that were found on the Rockingham estate of Simpson, well, clearly he's got no blood. There's no blood in his car, but minus a few drops, barely any drops on the property, and no bloody clothes. I mean, these are the things they're trying to say about Koberger, that he somehow, there's not a speck of evidence in his car, his apartment, his parents' house, indicating that he cleaned anything that connected the crimes or anything. And again, it's the ambivalent nature of these narratives, right? So you have Koberger, this expert assassin, apparently, as the state's alleging, going into this house, murdering these 4 folks, in a home, superhero time in a home he's apparently never been in. And then he gets rid of all the evidence, right? Except for he's, left this damn knife sheath. It's the ambivalent nature of the evidence. So there should be a lot more evidence in that house. The evidence, if he's so brilliant, he's leaving this knife sheath. I mean, the narrative doesn't really fit. And then in OJ's the same way, like OJ's superhero timeline, getting rid of all the murder weapon, the evidence of all the clothes. But the evidence doesn't fit. He doesn't have all the wounds, so it's not, there should be more blood, right? There should be more blood in the car. There should be more blood in the property, he didn't have time to do these things. He makes a call to his ex-girlfriend, Paula Barbieri, at 10:02 or 10:03 p.m. The limo driver there gets there at 10:20. He leaves with the limo driver at 10:50. The murders allegedly occur at 10:32 to 10:42, according to the prosecution. And the home is 6 minutes away with hitting all green lights type of deal. So the idea that OJ Simpson's timeline is it just doesn't work. It really doesn't. I mean, they knew it. That's what I'm saying. The prosecution at some point knew these things. They knew Fuhrman was a Nazi. They knew their timelines didn't work. They knew Fuhrman didn't write reports. They knew evidence was planted. They just kept jamming this square peg into the round hole. It really makes you wonder. But yeah, it's a shit show. It was a shit show for sure. But yeah, the fact that I don't know, it's scary. It is scary though. I mean, obviously Koberger has a rough road ahead, but it is scary. I mean, even though again OJ didn't get convicted, he essentially was convicted the rest of his life in the court of public opinion. I mean, Chappelle even jokes about these things in the special. Dave Chappelle does. Koberger doesn't have it's not a bright road ahead, even if he doesn't get convicted, right? But as far as the court of public opinion goes, but the again, whenever I start kind of analyzing these details, I'm like, man, this is a really ridiculous amount of power that it has to exist to perpetrate these activities. And 20 years later, here in the OJ case, most folks still think OJ is guilty when even, 5 or 6 books of his innocence were written. I'm not talking about the prosecutors and the detectives. I'm just saying, like, folks laying out this evidence showing how there's no way it made sense were written immediately following the crimes, right? So the it's just wild to me, because again, whenever I see that power, I think relative to the Idaho 4 situation again, I have to, I just think that it's far more extent. I mean, obviously includes some sort of organized crime, drug trafficking, but I'm saying like even regarding like FTX money laundering operations, like that stuff. Like that's a level of power that it's not generally understood. And again, on its face, in our American justice system, these things should not be dictating, the activities of crimes. Like again, these aren't objective looks into these crimes, right? They're not objective looks to say who killed Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman. There was no objective look, and that's what I'm saying. There's no objective look. So, as far as the justice of the Idaho 4 victims, right? Like, they can't retry that case. I mean, if there's a mistrial, you can try to retry Kohberger, but you can't bring that case against other people. You can't. They can't. I mean, there have been cases where that's occurred, where murder charges and trials have occurred, and they were found not guilty, and later murder charges were brought against other parties in the same case. But I don't think that can occur here in the Idaho 4 case, specifically concerning the politics and mass conviction of Kohberger in the media that has already occurred. So, in that power, I look to the FTX situation in the Idaho 4 case. I look to the fact that FTX and Scott Green, international businessman of wonder, turned University of Idaho president, Scott Green, are both coming into that immediate rural region at the same time. I don't think these things are by any stretch coincidence. But looking at the OJ situation, again, the power surrounding that situation, wow. I mean, the feds are, again, I don't think it's one faction. There's all these competing factions, because it seems like when you have defense attorneys releasing stuff afterwards, you have criminologists releasing exculpatory evidence afterwards. Like, there's a lot of stuff that could have been said during that trial that would have indicate that OJ was innocent. But the same thing, to a certain extent, I think, it's this power that drives those actions, right? This the fact that I know I mentioned it at the beginning of the show here, and I'm just now getting back around to it here at the end, that OJ Simpson was a Scientologist, right? Here he is himself.
At one point, I felt I had reached the state of clear, right?
Which is what?
Which is in Scientology, I guess, is the area where you're one with all, see all, know all. At least that's the way I interpreted it at the time. You got to that state? I thought I had, or I had from time to time reached that state, especially as an athlete. Sometimes you just feel that you're total control of your surroundings and can literally will everything around you to happen. And I call, the Scientologist place, the local place where I was first here in LA. Then I even tried to get hold of Mr. Hubbard at one point years ago. And
let me finish this clip. Actually,
there was nowhere to go from clear.
When
but
you
at the
called
same
the
time,
and said, I've
but at the
attained
same
clear.
time, yeah. So what happens after clear? Essentially, what I found out is that there's nothing. After clear, there's no.
So that's interesting. So that's a mid-'80s interview with OJ claiming that he attained clear in Scientology, but there's nothing else after clear, which, according to all available information about Scientology today, which didn't exist publicly then necessarily, stuff, all these, availability of the interwebs and researching Scientology, they have a lot of levels after clear, including they're called operating Thetan levels. I believe it was operating Thetan levels, goes clear, I believe 1, allegedly through 7 or 8, depending on their secret levels or whatever. But Marcia Clark's husband, an executive Sea Org member of Scientology, was, I believe, an OT7 at the time of the trial. And again, so was her first husband, a Scientologist. And her first husband was accidentally shot in the back of the head by a different Scientologist who would later be the officiant in the marriage of Marcia Clark and her second husband. So a lot of Scientology stuff going on there. But OJ definitely, by his own admission there, Scientology. So then you got the Scientology adjacent / dark wing of Scientology, perhaps, the Process Church, and fellas like old cocaine Bob Evans again. He's touted here is some of his relations with OJ Simpson. When Robert Evans beat OJ Simpson on his home tennis court. Well, that's a fun story for the ages. And then, again, these folks like to brag. And that's one thing they do enjoy doing. So, relative to the OJ case and Bob Evans, this is a Vanity Fair article from 2017, just talking silly nonsense, but it's discussing Paul Barbieri, visits OJ in jail. Bob Evans knows Paula Barbieri, comes out. So Paula Barbieri is that ex-girlfriend of OJ's that he called at like 10:03 that night, right? So in and around the times before the murders that occurred approximately at 10:32, 6 minutes away from OJ's house. But OJ was at his house. And he called Paula Barbieri. She's ever since then claimed that as she answered the phone, OJ may not have gone to kill those people. So she's played into that narrative immediately. So she actually says that she could have saved it if she'd answered the phone that night. At the time of the trial, at the time of the murders, she was OJ's ex-girlfriend because she was dating none other than Cocaine Bob Evans, Paula Barbieri. So Cocaine Bob rearing his ugly head again with the process Scientology connections surrounding all this stuff. It's difficult to pay attention to the mafia stuff that's going on around the OJ case too. But like I said, at one point in time, the state was not feeling too hot in the trial, right? This is September 95. This is late in the trial, right? And they were like, oh, shoot, we don't want to look like we targeted Simpson. Get those two mafia guys down here. We'll call them as prosecution witnesses, and we'll have them testify that Detective Van Adder told them last year that, don't worry, we didn't target Simpson. I don't know how that makes sense. It sounds like a crackhead kind of plan to me. Like, get two mob guys that are informants to come testify for us, saying the lead detective in this case, for whatever reason, told them we didn't target Simpson. So, but there you go. That was not the Fiato brothers. That's the that is the Fiato brothers. That was different from the other guy, the hitman guy that Nicole Brown Simpson's sister was dating at the time when she was the key witness. Strange folks surrounding this case. That's for damn sure. Not the only Scientologist. You thought the Scientologist started and ended there? It didn't. So you got Marsh Clark and gang. You got OJ Simpson. And the OJ Simpson media blitz and propaganda campaign brought us and introduced to the world none other than Greta Van Susteren, still a Scientologist to this day. Scientologist then as well. Folks may know her from Fox News, I believe. Yeah, Fox News anchor. However, she started with CNN at the OJ case, right? So she's saying in this blog article from a number of years ago, she regrets stuff, right? But, this is what made her career. Van Susteren's legal analysis of the trial is arguably the turning point in her career that set her on the path to becoming a well-known TV personality. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, she worked for CNN on that case. She was a Scientologist. So, Scientologist prosecutor, Scientologist defendant, Scientologist media coverage in the propaganda campaign. But they don't stop there because not a Scientologist directly, but back to Cocaine Bob in the process, the Scientologist adjacent, possibly Darkwing, situation. You have Ira Reiner, another man who was the TV commentator for this trial. Again, this was the first trial that was really this media blitz, 24/7 kind of coverage, live trial coverage as well from inside the courtroom. These are the personalities that sold us to America. Greta Van Susteren, Ira Reiner. Ira Reiner was friends with Charles Manson. Charles Manson hired this dude to represent one of the Manson girls. I believe it was Leslie Van Houten. So that was back another connection to the Manson trial in this OJ situation. Yeah, he represented Leslie Van Houten for about 8 months, beginning of the trial there in 1970. But he got connected there because he was friends with Charles Manson and solicited Manson to get him on the case. He would later become the LA District Attorney. So that's 1970. He would later become the District Attorney of Los Angeles in 1982 to 1990 or 1984 till 1992. Okay. So 1984 to 1992. Well, he's the guy that prosecuted the Cotton Club murders, old Bob Evans and gang, and the murder of Roy Radin, where Robert Shapiro told Bob Evans to plead the fifth. This was the prosecuting attorney for the county at the time. Again, so Bob Evans with this process connections. I'm not saying he knew Charles Manson directly, but they had common friends like Roman Polanski, right? And perhaps Robert DeGrimston and gang at the process, right? Because Chuck's famous for being connected to them and claiming to be deeply connected to Robert DeGrimston. Is certainly these videotapes talking about the process. He espouses process ideals. To say that there's not a connection, there's what people like Tom O'Neill in his new Netflix series Chaos, series Chaos, based upon his book Chaos about Charles Manson. And I'm sure he's still claiming that same thing, but nonetheless, it ain't accurate. Ira Reiner, though, so odd that we have Scientology in this, Charles Manson's friend, doing TV commentary for this. But yeah, he was a district attorney, so he was the one doing, he was the one who decided not to charge Bob Evans, right? The unindicted co-conspirator who pled the fifth as a prosecution witness in the Roy Rayton Cotton Club murders. Well, someone had to make that call not to charge him. I'm going to go ahead and point towards the district attorney, right? And he also prosecuted Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker case, and left just prior to the murder, 92. The murders of Nicole Brown and Simpson and Goldman were June of 93. But strange character to see on that scene, right? Of course, at the time, just preceding the murders, OJ was filming Naked Gun 33 1/3, The Final Insult, with starring fellow Scientologist Priscilla Presley, Elvis's ex-wife. It's a great example because one thing I say, if you see one Scientologist in a movie, not just in movies, but if you see one in a movie, you're gonna find others. They multiply like gremlins. In fact, just another example of how that manifests in society. Sonny Bono, deeply connected to the Process characters back to the 60s. They're in the Hollywood Laurel Canyon scene, but Sonny Bono, Scientologist, Sonny and Cher. He would, lifelong Scientologist. He would later become a U.S. congressman from California. His entire staff in Washington, D.C. in Congress, Scientologists. So you find one Scientologist, you're going to find more. As I'm going through here, I'm just going to wrap up some of these last few comparisons on the associated deaths, right? Well, let's see. Wait, finish out the mob stuff. So I said OJ had mob ties into Buffalo back into the 1970s, and that's documented through FBI records, right? This is just a picture of him with some of the mobster dudes in Buffalo in the 70s. That mobster dude would be murdered 2 weeks after Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman, and seemingly a matter in Florida that's still playing out today, revolving around DNA mixtures and potentially what seems the wrongful conviction of the man for that murder. That man is named Pablo Ibar, a Spanish fella. He allegedly murdered a fellow by the name of Kazimierz Sukarski. He was a nightclub owner in Buffalo. And again, this was June 26, 1994. So literally 2 weeks after the murders. He allegedly was involved in all sorts of stuff, this Sukarski fella, but very tight with OJ, and allegedly visited OJ not long before the murders there in Los Angeles. So he dies 2 weeks later in a very suspicious circumstances, and apparently, again, pinned on somebody, but maybe not the right culprit, it seems, because the accomplice in that crime was let out of prison back in 2012, and they keep retrying this guy for some reason. So it seems like there's some nefarious shit afoot in that one too. And of course, Al Callens, OJ's football buddy, who was driving the white Bronco. Here's an article here from back in '94. How Al Callens was the bodyguard for that Lucchese mobster Joey Ippolito, who owned the one of the restaurants there in Malibu that these things were going on. So Al Callens is the bodyguard for that guy. Again, back to James Caan, one of Bob Evans' buddies there. Bob Evans would put up his home for bail for this Ronald Lorenzo mafia guy who owned a different restaurant, right? This is an article linking all of these people with Lorenzo, Ippolito, Callens, and OJ. It doesn't mention Caan in this one, but Caan would put up his home for bail for Lorenzo. He would testify in Lorenzo's case in support of Lorenzo, and Ippolito would later hide out at Caan's house in and around the Brown Simpson Goldman murders while he's on run. He skipped town in Jersey, I believe it was, before his sentencing hearing. So, he was convicted, some drug stuff. Again, he owned a restaurant there and employed OJ's friend and white Bronco driver as a bodyguard. And they were trafficking drugs out of there. And not the only one, because again, that Lorenzo fellow was a different incident preceding these incidents at a different restaurant in Malibu. So these, much like Mezzaluna, the restaurant where Nicole Brown ate that night and her mother left her glasses, where Ron Goldman was a waiter, seemingly a lot of drug stuff going on around these restaurants, including, that Mezzaluna restaurant, not owned by the mob on paper, and the same stuff seems to be going on there because back in September of 95, so this is after the murders, Ron Goldman's fellow waiter from that restaurant murdered in a similar fashion. Right? Untimely death. This is Michael Nigg. He was an aspiring actor aspiring actor. I wonder if he went to that one Scientologist acting clinic there on Hollywood Boulevard. I really do wonder how much more Scientology stuff is going on here. But then there's a famous acting teacher there in Hollywood who uses his acting school as a recruitment center for Scientology. But he was an aspiring actor who worked as a waiter at a Beverly Hills restaurant. He was shot and killed during an apparent robbery attempt in Hollywood. It says he had formerly worked at Mezzaluna restaurant in Brentwood, where he had befriended Ron Goldman. So, this is the trail of deaths that I think surround some of these circumstances. Not only OJ's buddy, you also got Ron Goldman's buddy here who dies, and then you got another guy who's connected to all this network here as well. Who this guy dies before Ron Goldman. This is about a year before Goldman, 11 months. He's killed in a very similar fashion, very gruesome murder. Brent Cantor. He was a nightclub owner, and allegedly at the time of the death, these some of these restaurateurs associated with the stuff, they were allegedly opening up a new nightclub. So there may be some of that turf war going on. Who knows? But at the time of his death, he was dating Rose McGowan, which is a tangential connection to other characters such as her boyfriend Marilyn Manson. But as far as culty process stuff goes, whether or not fellows like this had any of those connections, unclear. But he certainly died a similar death to Ron Goldman. He had been stabbed repeatedly in the upper body. Was found dead in his Hollywood home, July 30th, 1993. No suspect has ever been identified. Well, and I'm just throwing this out there. Denise Brown, the primary witness for the prosecution, who dated the mafia hitman, maybe look at that guy. Maybe look at that guy. Just throwing that out there. Yeah, so I don't know. I don't want to get too far off of a process Scientology tangent here to wrap things up, but the correlations between these cases seem hopefully they seem obvious to more folks of the interwebs. I see there's a lot of comments in the chat I haven't been able to keep up with here, but I'm scrolling through here now, and I looks like there's some great comments here. So I hope I didn't miss any good ones here if y'all were commenting on some of these subjects. But hopefully I've emphasized my point that OJ Simpson, based upon the evidence and supported by the associated shenanigans and tomfoolery, did not do it. Right? He's wife beater, cocaine guy, perhaps. Right? Who knows? Not a murderer. And as far as that goes, it's just odd to me. It's odd to me to see these high-profile murder cases that are separated, substantially by time and distance, right? Geographically and spatially. They're, Los Angeles and Idaho, not that close together, geographically speaking, despite lots of Los Angeles moving to Idaho. So a lot of Hollywood folks live up in the Coeur d'Alene area for sure. There's the LAPD apparently has a retirement outpost up there around Sandpoint where Mark Fuhrman lives. So maybe it's a little bit more LA than I give it credit for, but geographically speaking, they're separated, and time-wise, they're separated, and activity-wise. I mean, outside my inferences of large-scale drug trafficking going around both these cases, as I've hopefully demonstrated is clear and present around the OJ case, and seems to rear its ugly head around the Idaho 4 case, considering the lengthy and seemingly organized efforts of drug trafficking and the Greek organizations on both those campuses. it just seems to me like it just seems so odd that there's these correlations, so many correlations between these cases. And again, it's almost like, I'm not gonna say it's the same playbook. It's a similar playbook though, because I think the impetus behind convicting OJ is different from the impetus behind convicting Kohberger, but nonetheless, we're dealing with very anomalous murders, right? You know, Brentwood's a very affluent neighborhood of Los Angeles, right next to Beverly Hills. They don't get a lot of murders like that. So you got these two affluent white folks murdered in Brentwood, on a quiet Sunday night, no different than you don't see 4 college students living in an off-campus home who were subject to a home invasion that, well, I mean, by all appearances, a home invasion, despite law enforcement not want to call it that necessarily, who were victimized and murdered with almost no sound, sights, or evidence. So, it really draws into question, again, what really goes on in these situations. But nonetheless, like, it's so odd to me when I turn on to look at some coverage of the case, to see who's talking about it. And again, you got old felon Nazi Mark Fuhrman, but then you also got Scientologist Marcia Clark, right?
Murder case against Brian Kohberger. A couple of them actually.
It looks kind of scary here with whatever she's done to her face there, looking like an alien perhaps, but nonetheless, these folks have been covering this case since day one, providing commentary. Again, I don't know that they should be trusted for any commentary in any case, given especially Fuhrman's actions. Again, he doesn't have to even answer questions about these things. It's kind of hilarious. But the lack of honest investigation in either case, the lack of objective investigation, what appears to be the planting of evidence, the FBI and their uninvestigation activities, more so in the Kohberger situation than the OJ, it seems. But nonetheless, the DNA is being played with in both these cases relative to the PCR test. The murder weapon, nowhere to be seen, nowhere to be found, nowhere to be searched. No one gave a shit. The trail of deaths, the drug trafficking, again, the correlations just seem too creepy, especially to be unrelated, right? And again, I'm not saying that Scientology or the process or any of those aspects are present in the Idaho 4 situation, but these things take strange networks, right? These they have strange connections, if you will. Again, on its face, Mark Fuhrman, when that author got a call from a whistleblower in the LA County Prosecutor's Office about Mark Fuhrman being related to the white nationalist domestic terrorist organization this dude wrote about 10 years prior that was from Idaho. On its face, the guy was probably like, well, that doesn't, what? Because again, on its face, that doesn't make any sense, right? But, it seems to be the case. And, it seems that these networks somehow network together, right? So maybe if it's not, similar activities, again, from some sort of, drug trafficking or cartel or mob type situation, maybe it's some similar activities permeated through the financial aspects of the situation, especially when I see crazy correlations with F. Lee Bailey being connected to BCCI and Sam Bankman-Fried's creepy French fella co-partner in the Moonstone Bank being connected to the same scandals and money laundering and drug trafficking and spook business. So however these things permeate with these playbooks or whatnot, or whatever parapolitical powers exist permeating this nonsense on the American public and in violation of American jurisprudence and in violation of folks' rights. One thing that really didn't become an issue, and again, Fuhrman should have to answer when someone puts him on TV, is why did you violate OJ Simpson's rights? Mark Fuhrman went over to his house, jumped the gate and the fence, and allegedly found the most incriminating evidence against OJ Simpson without a search warrant or without cause for a search. The same can be said for Brian Kohberger. So, the parapolitical powers that exist that can not only permeate these propaganda machines on the American public, but can violate the shit out of people's rights. That's it's an odd chain of circumstances and events, but nonetheless, OJ did not do it, and neither did Brian Kohberger. So hope you folks at the interwebs enjoyed that one, and again, looks like some great comments in the chat, and until next time.
Well, that's it. that's the show here, folks. So the next time you're out on the town, visiting your local watering holes, or perhaps just meandering around, and you hear the unmistakable sounds of metal clanking, and you spot signs of a disturbance, but check your six. Look in that garbage can, 'cause you never can tell. The GCDs may be loose in your town.